Silence is a funny thing. I used to chase after it. When you spend 45 years of your life in a symphony of grinding metal, the scream of an impact wrench, and the deep, satisfied rumble of a perfectly tuned V8. Silence is a five-star vacation for the ears. It was the reward at the end of a long day. A prize as welcome as a sweating bottle of cold beer on a Friday night. In my garage, Frank's Auto Repair, which I'd opened when I was still a kid, with more grease under his fingernails than sense, and closed when my back started screaming louder than any engine. There was no silence. There was work. There was a world that made sense, where every problem had a cause. A busted gasket, a clogged fuel line, bad timing, and every cause had a solution that fit in my two hands. Now, Silence was my roommate, and it was the worst damn roommate you could imagine. It moved into this house exactly 6 months, 3 weeks, and 2 days ago, the same Tuesday that Eleanor moved out for good. Since then, the silence had spread through the rooms like black mold in a damp cellar. It soaked into the wallpaper, settled on the old furniture, and seeped into the cracks between the floorboards. The creak of those same floorboards under my worn-out work boots no longer sounded like home. It sounded like a gunshot in an empty warehouse. The lazy tick-tock of the old grandfather clock in the living room, the one Ellie and I bought at a flea market 40 years back, wasn't measuring time anymore. It was counting off the seconds of emptiness, each one a dull, methodical thud. I sat on the back porch, in our creaky rocking chair that Ellie loved. She used to say its groan sounded like a contented old man. Now, it just groaned. The sun, big and orange as an overripe cantaloupe, sank slow behind the rolling hills, bruising the sky purple and red. My Ford F-150 sat in the driveway, which was cracked like a map of old county roads. A 98. Rust, like a quiet disease, was starting to eat at the wheel wells, and the once proud blue paint had faded to the color of a tired sky. But turn the key, and that Triton V8 coughed to life like an old soldier answering roll call. Dependable. I used to think I was too. Inside the house, the phone rang, shrill and out of place like a scream at a funeral. It was the only sound that dared to challenge the silence. I didn't move. Phone calls lately didn't bring much good news. It was usually polite young people trying to sell me funeral insurance. You want to take care of your loved ones, don't you, Mr. Walters? Or what amounted to pretty much the same thing. It was my kids. With a grunt, I pushed myself up. My knees, worn down by decades on cold concrete, screamed in protest. I walked into the house, which smelled of dust and something vaguely foreign, the smell of Eleanor's absence. The caller ID on the cordless handset glowed. Sarah, my daughter. I picked it up, already knowing how this tune went. "Hi, Dad." Her voice was bright and fast, like she was walking and talking, checking emails and giving orders to some invisible assistant at the same time. "Hey, Sarah. Listen, I don't have much time, so I'll get right to it. Mike and I were talking and... Well, how are you doing out there, really? All alone? We're worried, honestly. The house is so big. It's a lot to keep up with. The roof, the yard, the taxes. Maybe it's time to start thinking about downsizing. We found this great senior living community in Green Valley. It's only a couple hours away. They have round-the-clock medical care, social activities. You know." I was quiet. My eyes were fixed on the big framed photo on the living room wall. It's me and Ellie, young, standing in front of this same house when it was just a skeleton of fresh pine boards. Next to us are Sarah and Mike, just little kids with scabby knees and missing teeth, staring not at the camera but at the house, with that kind of childhood wonder that sees a miracle in a pile of lumber. I built it myself. Every weekend, every vacation, for 2 straight years. I mixed the concrete, laid the cinder blocks, hoisted the trusses. My hands were bloody and full of splinters. My back ached something fierce, but I didn't see a construction site. I saw a fortress, a place where my family would be safe, a place where my kids would grow up. Dad, are you listening to me? Are you there? I hear you, Sarah. Loud and clear, I said slowly. I hear you didn't ask how my day was, but you've already picked out my room at the old folks' home. A short, tight pause hung on the line. I could picture her on the other end, rolling her eyes, fighting back the annoyance. Dad, don't start. It's not a nursing home. It's a modern residential community. We're just trying to look out for you. This house, it's too big for one person. It's full of memories. Isn't it hard for you to be here? Full of memories. She said it like she was talking about termites. Like memories were an infestation. You had to fumigate and get rid of so you could move on. For me, those memories were the only other tenants left in this empty house. They were all I had. The only thing that's hard, sweetheart, is conversations like this, I said, my voice flat. Fine, Dad. Whatever. We didn't mean to upset you. Anyway, we're coming by on Saturday. We need to go through some of Mom's things, and we can talk about it then. Calmly. Mike's coming too. Kisses. Love you. The click of her hanging up. She didn't even wait for a goodbye. Love you. An automatic phrase she threw around as easily as, I'll call you back. I slowly placed the phone back in its cradle. If I'd known then, 30 years ago, hauling sacks of cement, that in my old age I'd become a ghost in my own family photos, one they were anxious to store in a dusty attic, I would have said to hell with it all and bought myself a boat. A big one with a powerful motor, and I would have sailed it right up to the Great Lakes and never looked back. But I was a father. I was a husband. I did what I thought I was supposed to do. I kept my mouth shut and paid the bills. I figured that was enough. Turns out, I'd swallowed a lot more crap than was good for me. I went back to the porch. The evening was getting darker. The wind kicked up dust devils in the driveway. The silence crashed down on me again, heavy as a lead blanket. But now there was a new note in it. It wasn't just the grief of losing Eleanor. It was something else, something cold and sharp as a needle. The feeling that you haven't just been forgotten. You've been carefully, quietly, and politely erased. Saturday showed up like an unwanted relative, bringing with it a dreary, spitting rain that turned the world outside my window into a gray watercolor smudge. At noon sharp, just as they'd promised, 2 cars materialized in my driveway, looking as out of place as spaceships in a cornfield. Sarah arrived in her gleaming Japanese SUV, which probably cost more than my house and the land it sat on when I first built it. Mike pulled up in a sleek, soulless German sedan, black and polished, like the soul of a modern middle manager. They came inside, shaking drops of rain from expensive cashmere coats, and brought with them a foreign smell, a mixture of pricey cologne, new car leather, and success. A kind of success that had no room for the lingering scent of motor oil, for creaking floorboards, or for the old mechanic who had, in fact, paid for that success. Hey, Dad. Mike, my son, clapped me on the shoulder. The gesture was meant to be friendly, but it felt hollow and rehearsed, like something he'd practiced in a mirror. Brought some grub so you don't have to cook. Sarah, my daughter, placed a large paper bag on the old kitchen table with a business-like efficiency. It was from one of those fancy grocery stores where the food looks like it was designed for a photo shoot, not for eating. Inside were plastic boxes of some kind of green leaves, mysterious grains and vegan patties, and a loaf of bread that looked like it was made from sawdust and good intentions. "We figured you weren't in the mood to cook," she said. But her eyes weren't on me. They were sweeping across the kitchen, assessing and judging. They lingered on the old enamel sink, stained yellow from years of use, slid over the faded chintz curtains that Eleanor had sewn herself 2 decades ago, and paused on a small crack in a floor tile. I didn't see concern in her eyes. I read a verdict. On this house. On this way of life. On me. Lunch was torture. They chattered about their projects, about Mike's promotion, about Sarah's plans for a vacation in Italy, about the trouble they were having with the contractor building their new deck. I sat there, chewing on their tasteless grass, nodding, and feeling like a silent exhibit in the museum of my own life. The placard beneath me would read, "Father, common variety, obsolete model, requires disposal." They didn't ask me a thing, not about my health, not about my thoughts. I was a function to them, a piece of the furniture that was due for an upgrade. Finally, after pushing her box of quinoa aside, Sarah got to the real reason they were here. "Dad, let's be serious. We weren't just spitballing on the phone. We've already spoken to a realtor, a sharp guy, a friend of Tom's. He said property values in this area are at an all-time high. If you sell the house, you could not only buy a beautiful apartment in that Green Valley community, you'd have a substantial amount left over for a comfortable retirement. You wouldn't have to worry about the roof leaking, or the septic tank, or the property taxes." "Your inheritance taxes, you mean?" I said quietly, almost to myself. Mike, who had been scrolling through his phone, looked up. "What was that?" I said, "It's you two who'll be paying a hell of an inheritance tax if I kick the bucket in this house." I looked up at them. "But if I sell it now, that money goes into my personal bank account. And it's a big question when you'll ever see it. That's the real issue, isn't it? Let's cut the crap about looking out for me." Sarah's face flushed a blotchy red. "Dad, how can you even think that? We are worried about you. You're all alone out here in the middle of nowhere. What if you fall down the stairs? What if you have a heart attack? Who's going to help you? We can't just drop everything and drive out here every time." "My neighbor Jim checks on me every day." My voice was cold and steady. "His 16-year-old son shovels my driveway all winter. For free. Because that's what his father taught him. Because we're neighbors. You two live an hour away. And in the last 6 months, this is your 3rd visit. So don't you dare talk to me about concern. You didn't come here to go through your mother's things. You came to assess the asset." The conflict hung in the air, thick and foul, like the smoke from a burnt clutch. They stared at me with a mixture of hurt and annoyance, like I was a stubborn, senile old man who couldn't recognize a good deal when he saw one. They didn't see a father. They saw a problem to be managed, an asset to be liquidated before it depreciated. After they left, the house felt more than just empty. It felt desecrated. Their words, full of memories. "It'll be hard for you. Protect the asset," spun in my head like a warped, out-of-tune record, and a bitter, angry resentment began to boil inside me. Not at them, at myself, for letting it come to this. In a fit of some kind of desperate self-destruction, I went upstairs to our bedroom. I opened Eleanor's closet. Her dresses, her blouses, her robes still hung there, holding the faint, ghostly scent of her perfume, a mix of lavender and something sweet, floral. I ran my hand over the silk of her favorite party dress. The material felt cold, lifeless. And then my hand brushed against something hard and rectangular on the top shelf, pushed all the way to the back. behind a stack of old wool sweaters she wore in the fall. I got a stool and wrestled it down. It was an old wooden box, not big, about the size of a shoebox, made of a dark wood that was polished smooth by time, with a simple brass latch that had no key. I was certain I had never seen it before. I placed the box on our bed, on the quilt that Ellie had embroidered herself. For some reason, my heart started to pound. The latch was flimsy. I took my old pocket knife from my jeans, pried at the hasp, and it popped open with a small click. I slowly lifted the lid. The creak of the hinges sounded deafening in the quiet room. Inside, stacked neatly, were bundles of letters tied with faded satin ribbons. Next to them were several thick diaries with hard cardboard covers. I picked up the top letter. The paper was thin, almost translucent. The handwriting was painfully familiar, a beautiful, elegant script that slanted slightly to the right. My Eleanor's handwriting, but it wasn't addressed to me. "Dearest Leo." The first line read, "Leo." I racked my brain. I ran through a mental Rolodex of every friend, relative, neighbor, and colleague from the last 50 years. I didn't know a single Leo, not one. With trembling hands, I unfolded the brittle yellowed page. "Dearest Leo, today was a particularly hard day. I know I promised not to complain, but sometimes it's the only thing that keeps me from screaming." Frank came home from the garage well after midnight again, black with grease, tired to the bone, but with that boyish, happy grin on his face. He said he's almost finished restoring that old Mustang for Mr. Henderson, and with the money, we can finally pay for Sarah's first semester of college. He's so strong, my Frank. So dependable. He carries our whole world on his shoulders and doesn't even flinch. And that's exactly why I can never tell him. I can't add my own weight to his load. This gray, sticky darkness that lives inside me. It's mine alone. Sometimes it squeezes my throat so tight I can't breathe, Leo. And only your letters, your words, help me take the next breath. I sat on the edge of our marital bed, holding that piece of paper, and the world I had so carefully built and defended for 47 years began to slowly, silently crumble around me, like a house made of playing cards. Darkness? What darkness? What in God's name was she talking about? And who the hell was this Leo, who was helping my wife breathe, while I was busy fixing other people's cars to pay for our children's future? I didn't sleep that night. I became the night watchman of someone else's secrets. The rocking chair on the porch was my guard post, and the old wooden box in my lap was the subject of my intense, obsessive study. I read. One letter after another, page after page, diary entry after diary entry. With every turned page, I sank deeper into a parallel universe, into the secret, hidden life of the woman with whom I had shared a bed, a table, and 47 years of my life. At first, the feelings were simple and toxic. Jealousy, hot and searing, like touching a hot manifold. Betrayal. I pictured this Leo, probably some sophisticated intellectual with glasses, a quiet voice, and an understanding smile. Someone she could talk to about poetry and the gray darkness, while I, the crude mechanic, could only discuss spark plug gaps and tire pressure. I was angry at her for the deceit, angry at him for existing, and angry at myself for being so goddamn blind. But the more I read, the more complex my feelings became. The jealousy began to give way to bewilderment, and then to a dull, aching compassion. These weren't the letters of a lover to her paramour. These were the cries for help of a person locked in the solitary confinement of her own illness. Eleanor never called it by its name. She gave it metaphors. The gray fog that rolled in without warning and washed all the color from the world. The quiet thief of joy that snuck into the house and stole the laughter. The lead blanket that made it impossible to get out of bed in the morning. Today, any shrink would have a diagnosis in 10 minutes. Clinical depression. But back then, in the 70s, the 80s, in our small blue-collar town where what was valued was strength, endurance, and the ability to keep your chin up, they didn't have words like that. You had nerves, or the blues, or bad thoughts. You didn't go to a doctor for that. You fought it alone, with your teeth gritted, especially if you were the wife of the best auto mechanic in town and the mother of 2 kids. You didn't have the right to a gray fog. You had a sacred duty to be the sun that shines on everyone. And damn it, she was. For me, for the kids, for all the neighbors. But in these letters, on these fragile pages, she was different. Vulnerable. Scared to death. Desperate. She described days when the only heroic act she could manage was to get out of bed, wash her face, and stretch a smile onto her face before the kids woke up. She wrote about panic attacks that ambushed her in the checkout line at the grocery store, and how she'd quell them by digging her fingernails into her palms so hard they left bloody crescents. She wrote about the unbearable guilt of not being the perfect, ever-happy wife and mother she felt she was supposed to be. And she wrote about me a lot. And those were the lines that cut the deepest. Frank is a good, kind man. Probably the best I've ever known. He's like a rock. But that's precisely the problem. He sees the world in black and white. There are things that are broken and things that work. If it's broken, you fix it. Replace a part, tighten a bolt, pour in some new oil. But how could I explain to him that what's broken is something he can't see, that my soul hurts? He wouldn't understand. He would immediately want to fix it. He'd start taking me apart like an old carburetor, looking for the faulty piece, giving me advice. And I don't want to be fixed. I just want someone to know that I'm not always the strong, smiling Ellie that everyone sees. Just to know, and not try to do anything about it. Every word was like a hammer blow to my knuckles. She wasn't just hiding her pain from me. She had passed judgment on me. Simple. Black and white. Not sensitive enough to understand. And she had found someone who was. Leo. His replies were in the box, too. Long letters on thin blue airmail paper, covered in the confident script of a doctor. The postmarks were from different cities and later, from Europe. His letters were full of not passion, but therapeutic warmth. He explained brain chemistry to her, the nature of her illness, taught her breathing techniques to manage her panic. He supported her, and yes, he loved her, but it was the love of a brother for a sister, a doctor for a patient, a lifeguard for a drowning swimmer. He called her my brave little sister, my silent soldier. Memories began to surface in my mind, but now they were cast in a different light. I remembered those days when she was particularly quiet and withdrawn. I thought she was just tired. I remembered her sudden migraines that made us cancel plans to go out with friends. I blamed it on the weather. I remembered her habit of sitting by the window for hours, just staring at the road. I thought she was waiting for me to come home from work. But maybe, in those moments, she was fighting off another attack of the gray fog. I wasn't just blind. I was a self-satisfied idiot. I saw only the facade she had so painstakingly built for me. The facade of the perfect American family. I was proud of that facade, because it was a reflection of my own success. I built the house. I provided for my family. I created a world where everyone was happy. At least I'd forced myself to believe it, and now I understood. I hadn't been betrayed in the cheap, common way a man fears being betrayed. There was no affair. This was something far more subtle and devastating. There was an entire universe of her soul that was locked to me, and while I was up to my elbows in grease, tightening some other guy's lug nuts to pay the bills for our happy world, she was fighting a war all alone. And her only ally, her only field hospital, was this mysterious Leo. A bitter resentment rose in my throat again. Why not me? Why hadn't she trusted me? Was I really so primitive and thick-skinned in her eyes that she preferred to entrust her soul to a stranger 1,000 miles away? That question haunted me. It was more important than all the others. At dawn, as the sky in the east began to lighten, I couldn't sit still any longer. I climbed into my old F-150. The familiar roar of the engine was the only sound that could drown out the chaos in my head. I just drove. No destination, no plan. I drove on roads I knew like the back of my hand, past sleeping farms, past fields shrouded in morning mist, past the abandoned Texaco station where a rusted sign squeaked on the wind like a restless ghost. I drove, and my memory, awakened by the night's reading, began its cruel work. It didn't just show me pictures from the past, it presented me with invoices. Unpaid invoices for their, my children's, comfortable present. I drove past the high school, a big brick building with an old oak bench still sitting on the front lawn. I saw my daughter, Sarah, on that bench, as she was at 18, crying her eyes out, a letter in her hand. She'd been accepted to a prestigious private university she'd dreamed of since she was a little girl, but it was an Ivy League school, and the tuition was astronomical, like a trip to the moon. We couldn't afford it. I remember how Eleanor tried to console her, and I just quietly walked out of the house. I didn't say anything. I just went and did. The next day, I drove into the city. I wasn't in my pickup. I was driving my dream, a cherry red 1970 Chevrolet Chevelle, perfectly restored, with a roaring 454 big block engine. I had poured 3 years of my life into it. Every spare minute, every extra dollar, every nut, every bolt was original. It wasn't just a car. It was my youth, my freedom, my one trophy. I drove it to a used car lot run by a greasy guy in a stained shirt, who walked around it, clicked his tongue, and named a price that was exactly half of what it was really worth. I didn't haggle. I didn't have time. I silently took his grubby check, handed over the keys, and walked away without looking back. I felt like I had sold a piece of my soul. That evening, I placed the check on the kitchen table in front of Sarah. She looked from me to the check, and her eyes filled with tears of joy. She hugged me, so tight. "Thank you, Daddy. You're the best." She never, not once, asked where the money came from. She just took it and went off to build her brilliant career. The Chevelle, for her, remained just an old car I had sold a while back. The pickup carried me on, past a boarded-up building at the end of Main Street. That used to be Mike's Bar, my son's business idea when he was 25. He was full of enthusiasm, but completely lacking in business sense. He went bust in 6 months. Debts to suppliers, unpaid rent, threats. He came to us, broken, pale, and scared. Eleanor cried all night. In the morning, I put on my one good suit, the one I only wore for weddings and funerals, and I went to the bank. I sat in a cold office across from a loan manager and signed the papers for a second mortgage on our house. The house I had built with my own hands. I felt humiliated and terrified, but I saw my son's face in my mind. I gave him all the money. He thanked me profusely, swore he'd pay back every cent as soon as he got back on his feet. He never did. A year later, when he, having learned his lesson, started a new and successful IT startup with some investors' money, he didn't offer to pay me back or give me a piece of the business. He called and asked me if I could help him move furniture into his fancy new office with my old pickup, and I did it. My hands squeezed the steering wheel until my knuckles were white. I drove past the elementary school, and memory served up another invoice. My grandson, Sarah's boy, little Jimmy. The doctors found he had a severe form of asthma. Expensive imported medications, special inhalers, constant visits to specialists in the city. It all added up to a fortune. Sarah and her husband, Tom, had just gotten in over their heads with a mortgage on their huge new house in the suburbs. And, as usual, they were short on cash. "We're tapped out, Dad." And so I, a 60-year-old man who owned his own successful garage, went and got a second job as a night watchman at a cold, drafty warehouse on the edge of town, from 8 at night to 6 in the morning. I dozed in a small office, drinking vile instant coffee from a vending machine to stay awake. And at 8 in the morning, I'd drive to my garage and work until evening. I was sleeping 4 hours a night. I kept that up for almost a year, until things got better for them. I remember that Christmas. They gave me a sweater with reindeers on it. I think it cost less than 1 tank of gas for my weekly trips to that damned warehouse. I never complained. I never sent them a bill. I was a father, a man, the head of the family. In my world, that was just what you did. You sacrifice. You haul the load. You don't expect a parade or a thank you note. You think that respect and love are just part of the deal, that they're built into the very structure of a family, like the foundation of a house. I pulled the pickup over on the shoulder by the old iron bridge that crossed the river. I got out and leaned on the cold, damp railings. Below, the dark, almost black water flowed lazily. I looked at my reflection. An old man stared back at me, a face carved with wrinkles like a dry creek bed, hands with grease permanently etched into the lines, hands that would never be truly clean, hands that had built and fixed and earned and given, hands that had given everything away and were left empty. In that moment, staring at the river, I finally understood. Eleanor's letters weren't a curse. They were a bitter but necessary medicine. Without knowing it, she had shown me the truth not only about herself, but about me. I was also a silent soldier in my own invisible war. Only my battle wasn't against an inner darkness, but against the outside world, with all its bills and expectations. And I was losing that battle too, because I had always remained silent. I came home a different man. The exhaustion was still there, but now it was mixed with a cold, sober resolve. I opened the wooden box again. But this time, I wasn't looking for emotion in the letters. I was looking for facts, addresses, dates, names. My eyes, now focused, caught the return address on one of the envelopes from Leo. A neat postmark, a small town in Maine. The sender's name, written in a clear, confident hand, Leopold Kaminsky. I sat down at the old, whirring desktop computer in the corner of the living room, a Christmas gift from Mike years ago, which he condescendingly called my typewriter. My fingers, used to the rough steel of wrenches, slowly and clumsily pecked at the plastic keys. Search engine. Leopold Kaminsky, Maine. A few seconds of waiting, and the screen filled with links. The very first one was an obituary in a local online newspaper. Dr. Leopold Kaminsky, a renowned psychiatrist and one of the country's leading specialists in the treatment of post-traumatic stress disorder and major depressive disorder, passed away suddenly 2 years ago at the age of 72. I kept reading, and my heart sank. At the end of the text, after listing his professional achievements and awards, came the standard line about grieving relatives. He will be deeply missed by his loving sister, Eleanor Walters, née Kaminska. Kaminska, my Eleanor's maiden name. It was like a circuit finally connected in my brain. With a deafening click that made the room go dark for a second, everything fell into place. Leopold. Leo. It was her older brother. The one she almost never talked about. I knew he existed. I knew the vague story of their childhood. Their parents had divorced when Ellie was 7 and Leo was 10. Their mother, a difficult woman, had taken the son and moved to another state, cutting off all contact. Eleanor stayed with their father. I had always assumed they had never seen each other again. I was wrong. They had found each other, as adults, as established people. And he, who had become a doctor of human souls, became the doctor for his own sister's soul, the only person in the world she could trust with her darkest secret, without fear of being a burden to her new family. To me, I found the phone number for the clinic where he had worked until his death online. I hesitated, wondering if I should call, but something pushed me. I dialed the number. After several long rings, a tired female voice answered. I introduced myself as the husband of Eleanor Walters and, stumbling over my words, tried to explain the reason for my call. There was a long silence on the other end. I thought she had hung up. I remember that name, the woman finally said. Finally, it was his former nurse, who had worked with him for 30 years, as she later introduced herself. Her name was Martha. Dr. Kaminski worried a great deal about his sister. A great deal. He spoke of her often. He said she was the bravest, strongest person he knew, because she was fighting her war all alone, deep behind enemy lines, where no one even knew a battle was raging. I listened, holding my breath. He planned to visit you several times, to meet you, the children. He believed you should know that together you could handle it. But Eleanor forbade him every time. She almost begged him. I remember her words from one phone call. The doctor hung up and just sat staring out the window for a long time afterward. She told him, "Leo, don't. Frank is a builder. He builds our world, our home, our future. He carries everything on his back. I can't show him the cracks in the foundation. He wouldn't be able to stand it. He'd drop everything to try and save me, and then everything else would collapse." Martha's words weren't like a punch. They were like a shock from a defibrillator. Painful, but life-restoring. She didn't think I was primitive or insensitive. She was protecting me, in her own way. She thought the truth about her illness would break me, distract me from my main mission of being the provider and protector. She carried her unbearable burden in absolute silence so that my burden would be a little lighter. This wasn't a secret of infidelity. It was a secret of sacrifice. Just as silent, as total, and as invisible as my own. That evening, I sat on the porch again, in the same chair, but the silence was no longer an enemy. It was filled with meaning, with voices from the past, with understanding. The bitterness and jealousy were gone, dissolved, leaving behind only a deep but surprisingly peaceful sorrow. I forgave her in that instant, forgave her for her silence, because now I understood its true cost. And in that forgiveness, in that belated understanding, I found strength. The strength to deal with the other, far dirtier and uglier story. The story of the real cracks in my foundation. 2 days later, they were back, just as I'd expected. But this time, they didn't come empty-handed. They came with reinforcements and heavy artillery. Sarah's husband, Tom, a slick lawyer with shrewd eyes and a smile that didn't reach them, was with her. And Mike was carrying a thick folder of documents. They didn't waste time on small talk or plastic salads. They went straight to the kitchen and spread their papers out on the old oak table where Eleanor used to roll out dough for apple pies. "Dad, we've thought this through and got everything prepared," Mike began, in that rehearsed, confident tone he probably thought made him sound like a businessman. "We consulted with Tom and some other attorneys. The most sensible and civilized option in your situation is to create a trust fund." Tom, Sarah's husband, nodded knowingly, adjusting his expensive glasses. "To put it simply, Frank, you transfer ownership of the house into the trust. You remain the lifetime beneficiary, which means you can live here as long as you wish. And Sarah and I become the trustees. That means all legal and financial decisions regarding the asset, its maintenance, potential sale, or rental in the future, will be made by us. It's standard practice. It protects the asset. And you. It protects the asset." He said it just like that, not, "It protects you," but it protects the asset. They weren't even trying to hide their true intentions anymore. I looked at their faces. Serious, concerned, businesslike. They weren't looking at me. They were looking at the house, at the land under it, at the potential numbers in a bank account. I was just an inconvenient, animate obstacle in the way of those numbers. My gaze drifted to the living room. My grandchildren were sprawled on the couch. Jason, Mike's son, and Emily, Sarah's daughter, teenagers. They hadn't even said hello when they came in. They were just sitting there, faces buried in their phones, earbuds in, completely detached from the scene. Suddenly, Jason snorted and nudged his cousin, showing her something on his screen. I caught a glimpse of my own face, distorted by some stupid TikTok filter, with donkey ears and a wagging tongue. The caption read, "Our grandpa, when we start talking about the inheritance." Emily giggled. That was it. That was the second blow. The kill shot, not to the heart, but to the very bottom of the soul. A public and merciless humiliation from the very kids I had worked as a night watchman for. And in that instant, something inside me clicked. Loudly and definitively, like an old fuse that had been holding back decades of pressure had finally blown. "So, if I understand you correctly," I began, and my own voice surprised me with its calm, icy steadiness. "You want me to voluntarily sign papers that strip me of the ownership of my own house, the house I built with these two hands." "It's not stripping you of ownership, Dad. It's optimizing the ownership structure," Mike corrected me, clearly proud of the term. "I was silent for 20 years. I slowly raised my eyes, moving my gaze from Mike to Sarah, to her smug husband. "I was silent when you took my money, my time, my dream. I thought that was called family. But I guess I swallowed more crap than I should have." They exchanged confused glances. The old man was going off script. "I'm not signing these papers," I said, and each word landed on the table like a heavy stone. "Not today. Not tomorrow. Not ever." Sarah's face flushed, twisting into a mask of righteous indignation. "But why? We're trying to help you. Stop being such a stubborn, selfish child." "No, Sarah." I stood up. I straightened my back, and my old bones seemed to fill with an unfamiliar strength. "A child is someone who forgets, who paid for their college degree at the cost of his own dream. A child is someone who takes his father's life savings to bail out his failed business and forgets to pay it back. A child is someone who thinks love and care can be measured in a carton of fancy salad and talk about optimizing assets. A dead, ringing silence fell in the kitchen. Even the grandchildren in the living room had gone quiet, pulling the earbuds from their ears. They were staring at me with a kind of frightened curiosity, like I was a TV that had just exploded. This house is mine. I built it. I paid for it with blood and sweat. Your mother and I lived in it for almost half a century. She fought her demons here in silence so as not to burden me or you. And I fought the world so that you would want for nothing. We both did it silently, but her silence came from love and unbelievable strength. Your silence is the greedy silence of heirs gathered around a rich relative's deathbed, impatiently checking their watches. In that moment, I felt no rage, no anger, only a cold, crystal-clear clarity. I looked at the thick folder of documents lying on the table. "Get out," I said quietly, but in a way that sounded louder than any shout. "Take your papers and get out of my house." I wasn't shouting. I wasn't threatening. I was simply telling the truth. For the first time in many, many years. The shock on their faces was real, but it wasn't from what I said. It was from the fact that I had dared to say it at all. The ghost from the old family photograph had suddenly spoken, and they really, really didn't like what he had to say. They left, slamming the door behind them, as if the noise could somehow restore their sense of control. Silence returned to the house. But my God, what a different silence it was. It was no longer the silence of emptiness and oblivion. It was my silence. One in battle, clean, resonant, and full of dignity. I slowly sat down at the table and looked at my hands for a long time. Hands with calluses, with grease ground into the lines, with scars from slipped wrenches. The hands of a creator, not a victim. In the days and weeks that followed, my phone went crazy. 35. Missed calls, the screen read. I didn't answer. I listened to the voicemails. At first, there were angry tirades from Mike. Then, tearful, guilt-tripping monologues from Sarah. They accused me of selfishness, of ingratitude, of senility. They tried to appeal to my pity, to my guilt, to the remnants of a father's love, but nothing inside me responded. The well they had drawn from for so long had run dry. Completely. I calmly deleted their messages, one after another. I didn't gloat or seek revenge. That would have been too small. I simply started to live for myself. The first thing I did was drive to the bank and close our old joint account, the one Sarah had a habit of borrowing from. Then I called my old buddy, a retired lawyer named Bill, with whom I used to go fishing. We sat in his kitchen for 2 hours. I told him everything. He listened silently, nodding, and then said simply, "It's about damn time, Frank." We drew up a new will, one that was as clear and simple as a hammer blow. The house, the land, all my modest savings. None of it was going to the kids. I divided it into 2 parts, half to a local Veterans Aid Foundation, for guys like me who had seen less luck in life. The other half to a national fund for the research and treatment of depressive disorders. I asked Bill to specify that it was a gift in memory of Dr. Leopold Kaminsky and his sister, Eleanor Walters. And then, I did something I had secretly dreamed of for 30 years. I opened my garage, not for work, but for my soul. In the furthest, most junk-filled corner, under a dusty tarp, there she was, an old motorboat. Wooden, with the elegant, predatory lines of a 1950s runabout. It had been passed down to me from Eleanor's father. But Ellie never liked it, said it was dangerous and unreliable, and I never had the time or energy for it. I pulled off the tarp. The varnish was cracked and peeling. The wood was darkened in places from dampness. The engine was dead. It was a lot like me. Old, neglected, but with good bones. And I went to work. It was a ritual. I scraped off the old varnish as if I were scraping off years of humiliation and silence. I sanded every board, every plank, bringing the wood back to its original, warm smoothness. I patched the leaks, inhaling the sharp scent of epoxy resin. I spent hours hunched over the engine, taking it apart piece by piece, cleaning the plugs, tuning the carburetor. The smell of fresh paint and marine varnish mingled with the familiar, comforting scent of gasoline and oil. My hands were busy again with real, meaningful work. But this time, I wasn't working for someone else. I was working for myself. My neighbor Jim, a retired trucker, came by almost every day. He'd bring coffee in an old thermos, sit on an overturned crate, and silently watch me work. We barely talked about my family. We talked about fishing, about politics, about the old days, about how modern cars are made of plastic and bullshit. He never asked any questions, but I saw a quiet, masculine approval in his eyes. He was the same breed. He understood. One day, when the boat was already gleaming with fresh varnish and its engine was purring contentedly at idle, a car pulled up to my house again. Just one this time. Sarah's small sedan. She got out and tentatively approached the open garage door. She looked tired and older. Without her slick husband or her businesslike brother, she seemed smaller, more vulnerable. She just stood there for a long time, watching me polish a chrome cleat on the bow. "She's beautiful," Sarah said quietly. "Yeah," I replied, not stopping my work. The pause stretched on. "Dad, I wanted to say, we were wrong." I put down the polishing rag. I slowly straightened up and looked at her. There were tears in her eyes. Maybe they were sincere. Maybe they were just well acted. I couldn't be sure anymore. "Maybe," I said evenly. I reread your texts about college, about your car. I found that car dealer online. His business is still around. I called him. He remembers you, Dad. He said you sold him the car of your dreams, the jewel of his collection, and didn't even haggle. You just said the money was for your daughter's tuition. I never knew. Now you do." She took a hesitant step forward into the garage. "Dad, can we fix this? Please." I looked at her for a long time. At my adult daughter, who only now, in her 40s, seemed to be starting to understand something. Or was pretending to. I felt no anger, no joy, just a vast cosmic weariness. "You can't fix the past, Sarah. You can only try to build the future differently." I didn't hug her. I didn't invite her in for coffee. I didn't give her the easy, tearful forgiveness she was probably looking for. I gave her something much more valuable and much harder. A chance. But this time, on my terms. "I'm launching the boat on Sunday morning, at the old dock on the lake. If you want, you can come, alone." She nodded silently, quickly wiped the tears away with the back of her hand, and just as quietly, she drove away. On Sunday, I stood on the wooden dock. The morning was clear and cool. The sun glinted off the hull of my boat, off the fresh coat of cherry red varnish. I had named her the Eleanor. She bobbed gently on the water, alive, beautiful, ready for her first voyage in many years. Sarah's car appeared on the road. She parked a short distance away and got out. She stood hesitantly on the shore, as if unsure if she was allowed to approach. I didn't say anything. I just nodded at her, and she came over, silently. She took one of the ropes and helped me push the boat away from the dock. I started the engine. It rumbled to life, a deep, powerful, even sound. I steered away from the shore, made a wide circle, feeling the boat respond obediently to every touch of the wheel. Then I motored out to the middle of the lake and killed the engine. Silence. But it was the right kind of silence. A living silence. The sound of water lapping against the hull, the distant cries of gulls, the rustle of leaves on the shore. I didn't sail off into the sunset. I didn't set off on a round-the-world trip. I wasn't looking for a new love. I just sat in my boat in the middle of the lake. I hadn't won back my house or my money. I had won back my self-respect. I had won back my right to my own life, to my own decisions, to my own silence. That evening, sitting on the back porch of my house, I took a pen and a clean sheet of paper. I started to write. Not for my children, not for my grandchildren, not for anyone else's eyes. I was writing for myself. Dear Frank, I wrote, today was a good day. You launched the boat. You've learned to appreciate the silence. You remembered that your hands know how to not just fix what's broken, but to build something of your own. You finally understood that the most important things in life aren't the things you can buy or inherit, but the things that can't be taken away from you. Dignity, memory, and the right to decide for yourself when to raise the sail and when to drop anchor. There are still many voyages ahead, and you, old man, are ready for them. I carefully folded the letter and went into the bedroom. I opened the old wooden box, and I placed my letter inside, next to Eleanor's letters and her diaries. It was our box now, together. A box of secrets that were no longer secrets. A box of pain that was slowly turning into wisdom. A box for two silent soldiers who had fought their wars alone, but had, in the end, each found their own kind of peace. I closed the lid. The house was quiet, and I liked the silence.